Man beaten to death by his friend returns with a message that changes everything. Max's breath hitched in the dark, a sharp rasp in the stillness of the night. The cold air burned in his lungs, but it wasn't the chill that made his chest tighten. It was the sense of something more, something beyond what his mind could grasp. His body was heavy, the ache in his limbs dull and persistent. His senses were foggy, distant, as though he had been suspended in time for too long. For a moment, he could hardly remember where he was. The darkness around him was complete, a thick void that swallowed all sound, all light. He could feel the ground beneath him, rough and uneven, like dirt that had been trampled down for years. The smell of decay, faint but unmistakable, reached his nostrils. It was as though something had been buried here, something or someone. Max's mind felt like it was swimming, trying to break free from the haze that clouded his thoughts. He struggled to move, his limbs trembling as if they were foreign to him, as if his body were someone else's. The pain, however, was all too real. The sharp pain that pulsed through his chest, the deep ache in his ribs, the weight of something heavy pressing down on him, pulling him deeper into the blackness. He tried to focus, to make sense of the confusion that consumed him. How had he gotten here? Why couldn't he remember what had happened? And then it came to him. The memory, so sudden, so sharp, that it hit him like a thunderclap ripping through the fog in his mind. Derek. The name burned through his consciousness, raw and urgent. The face that had haunted his last moments flickered in his mind, as vivid and clear as if he were standing right there in front of him. Derek had been his friend. They had been close, like brothers. Max had trusted him with everything. But that trust had shattered. That bond had been torn apart in the most brutal, unthinkable way. Max's eyes snapped open, but there was no light to see. No movement, no change in the surroundings. He could feel it, the coldness that seeped into his bones, but something else lingered in the air. It was an unnatural presence, a heaviness that weighed down the very space around him. He was no longer sure where he was, but a deep instinct told him he wasn't alone. The voice came from the shadows, a whisper that barely reached his ears but still sent a shiver racing up his spine. His pulse quickened as he strained to hear, to make sense of the sound. There it was again, a faint murmur, as if calling his name from the depths of the darkness. "Max, are you listening?" He froze. The voice sounded so familiar. It was low, controlled, almost soothing. But it wasn't just the voice that sent the cold chill through him. It was the way it wrapped around him, like a vine tightening around his chest. The words broke through his mind, snapping him back to reality. He had been betrayed. Derek. It wasn't just a fight that night. It wasn't just a heated argument. Derek had beaten him to death. The truth of it, the horror of it, came crashing down on him with the full weight of realization. Derek had done it. His friend. The person who was supposed to have had his back. They had fought. Max had never thought it would go this far, but now he could see it, feel it, the savage blows, the suffocating darkness that had closed in around him. Max had died that night. It was as clear as day. He had died at the hands of the one person he had trusted most in the world. And yet, here he was. Still here. The voice spoke again, a little clearer this time. "Max, don't be afraid." The words were gentle, but they carried a deep weight, a finality that twisted something inside of him. Fear flooded through him, and he couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Something was so wrong. "Where am I?" Max managed to croak, his voice barely a whisper, strained and hoarse. Silence stretched out. The voice didn't respond immediately. Max strained to hear any sound, any sign that he wasn't completely alone in the dark, but there was only the faintest sound of breathing, the heavy, ragged inhalations that seemed to come from everywhere. And then, the voice returned, colder this time. "You're not where you think you are." Max's heart skipped a beat. "Not where you think you are." The words resonated in his chest like a warning. The fear he had been suppressing began to creep up his spine, crawling under his skin. "Where am I then?" His head swam again, as if the question itself had triggered something. Images flickered in and out of focus. Derek's face twisted in anger, the sound of fists pounding into flesh, his own body lying in the dirt, unmoving. He had felt it all. He had been there, in that moment of violent rage, and then nothing. No sound, no sight, just darkness. Max's hand instinctively shot out, as if reaching for something, anything, to anchor him. His fingers grazed the rough surface of what felt like stone, smooth and cold to the touch. He wanted to pull himself up, to move, but the heaviness in his limbs wouldn't allow it. The air around him was thick, suffocating, like a weight pressing down from every side. Max's pulse quickened as the weight of everything, the betrayal, the violence, the death, came crashing down on him. Was he dead? Was this the afterlife? The voice spoke again, closer now, as if it had drawn near, watching him. You have been given a chance. A chance to make it right? Max shuddered, the implications of the words settling deep within him like ice. A chance? A chance for what? The voice seemed to smile, though Max couldn't see it. You will speak the truth of what happened, and what will come. The finality of the words sent a wave of panic through him. Max struggled to breathe, the weight on his chest growing heavier. What do you mean? He asked, his voice hoarse, desperate. But there was no immediate answer. Only the sound of his own ragged breathing filling the silence. Max's mind raced, his thoughts spinning in every direction, trying to piece together what was happening. The darkness around him felt suffocating, as if it was pulling the very life out of him, leaving nothing but cold, empty air. His fingers were trembling, still outstretched, searching for something solid, something to hold onto in the void. But there was nothing. What was happening to him? The voice lingered, its words like a shadow that followed him, its presence too powerful to ignore. You've been given a chance, Max. A chance to change everything. Max's heart hammered in his chest, the echo of the words reverberating in his ears. Change everything. He had died, hadn't he? He remembered the pain, the suffocating weight of his body as he struggled for breath, the pounding of his heart as his body betrayed him, the final blow delivered by Derek, the friend he had trusted more than anyone else. The betrayal stung even now, like an open wound in his chest. What does that mean? Max gasped, his voice trembling in the stillness of the dark. The voice didn't answer immediately. There was only the soft sound of breathing, deep and slow, rhythmic. Max couldn't shake the feeling that it was coming from everywhere, as though the air itself was alive with the voice's presence. You are not where you think you are, Max. The voice returned, quieter now, but still carrying that same weight, that same sense of inevitability. You are not gone. You have not yet crossed over. Max's mind reeled. Not gone? Not crossed over? He didn't understand. He had been killed. He had felt the darkness close in. He had felt his body give out. But now he was here, trapped, stuck in some kind of in-between. There was no light, no warmth. Just a never-ending void. The air around him grew thick again, heavier, pressing down on him as if the very space he occupied was tightening. He could feel the pressure rising, like a storm was about to break overhead, but there was no sky, no clouds. Just the weight of the unknown pressing against him. You were not meant to die, Max. The voice again, but this time it held an edge, a faint trace of something else, something colder. What happened to you was not fate. It was choice. Derek's choice. His betrayal. Max shuddered as the words hit him like a sharp slap to the face. Derek. His mind flashed back to that night. The night everything had shattered. The argument. The blows. The way Derek had looked at him before he struck him again and again, as though he were nothing. As though their friendship had meant nothing. No, Max's voice was barely a whisper, but it was the first thing he could say. It wasn't supposed to end like this, but the voice wasn't interested in comforting him. It didn't offer sympathy or even pause for a moment of understanding. It pressed on, relentless, its words like a hammer driving a nail deeper into his mind. What you don't understand, Max, is that death is not an end. It's only a part of the journey. And now, you are here because the path isn't finished. You were chosen to speak the truth, to reveal what lies ahead. The words were like ice shards, piercing Max's thoughts, settling deep into his chest. What did that even mean? What was he supposed to do with this information? He wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to carry any kind of burden. He had been dead. He had been taken from this world, from everything he knew. And now he was being pulled back? To do what? Max's head swam with confusion, but the voice pressed on, pushing him to understand, to accept whatever this was. The world is in danger, Max. It's unraveling. There are forces at work, dark forces, that are shifting everything, shaping the world into something unrecognizable. You have seen it, felt it. You are part of it. And now you have to help stop it? The words hit him like a wave crashing against the shore. The world was in danger? Dark forces? He couldn't believe it. He couldn't wrap his head around it. What was this force, this strange place, that now surrounded him? What was this prophecy or warning that he was being asked to carry? Max opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. He wanted to scream, to ask more questions, but the voice had silenced him, its power too immense for him to fight against. The truth must be spoken. The betrayal you suffered, the reason it happened, it's only the beginning. The voice began to fade, and Max felt his body tense with fear, as though the void itself was pulling away from him, leaving him to hang in limbo, suspended and alone. You will speak the truth, Max. The prophecy is written. And you must deliver the message. Max wanted to shout, to demand more answers, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't breathe. The pressure was too much. The darkness was closing in, tightening around him like a vice. And then, just as he thought he couldn't bear it any longer, there was a sudden shift. The darkness didn't fade, it didn't disappear. But there was something else. Something stirring, moving within it. A figure. A presence. Was there? Closer now. Max felt it before he saw it. A warmth, a presence that was different from the oppressive force around him. The air around him seemed to vibrate with it. Something had changed. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know what was coming next. But he felt it. Deep within him. It was too late to turn back. Max's heart raced, his mind caught in a whirlwind of confusion and dread. He could feel the presence. No, something drawing closer like a pull in the air, a magnetic force that was both terrifying and irresistible. The darkness remained, but now there was something else within it, shifting, moving, its form just out of reach. His thoughts were a blur, but through the panic, one thing became clear: he wasn't alone anymore. The air around him seemed to hum, vibrating with an unseen energy. It was a hum that had been building beneath the surface, slowly growing louder, like an impending storm. Max could feel it in his chest, that steady thrum, like the pulse of the universe itself, calling him towards something he had no understanding of. He felt the ground shift beneath him, a tremor running through the earth, though he couldn't see it. It was as if the very fabric of the world was alive, breathing with him, aware of his every movement. The shadows around him weren't just empty space anymore. They were alive, filled with intent, as if they were watching him, studying him, waiting. Max could feel his breath quicken as the presence drew nearer, and the weight of it pressed against his chest. The warmth he had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by an overwhelming coldness that seeped into his skin, into his very bones. It was suffocating, all-encompassing. Every part of him screamed to run, to escape, but he couldn't move. His body was frozen, locked in place, unable to fight against the unseen force that surrounded him. And then a figure appeared before him. At first, it was just a flicker in the shadows, a silhouette that seemed to shimmer and waver like a mirage. But as it moved closer, its form became clearer, taller than Max, with an ethereal quality, as if it wasn't entirely bound by the same laws of nature that governed him. The figure stepped into the faintest sliver of light, and Max's breath caught in his throat. The man, or at least what looked like a man, was clad in long, dark robes, his face hidden in shadow. His presence radiated power, authority, but there was a sadness to it, something deep and painful behind those faceless eyes. He didn't speak, but Max could feel his gaze on him, the weight of it settling into his chest like a heavy burden. "Who are you?" Max whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, he raised a hand, And with the smallest of gestures, the darkness around Max began to shift. The shadows parted, revealing fragments of what Max had been trying to avoid: visions. Fragments of memories. Shards of the past, twisting and bleeding into the present. He saw Derek's face, twisted in rage, the violent fury that had consumed him. The pounding fists. The broken trust. The feeling of betrayal, so intense it still burned in his chest, even now. But it wasn't just that night that Max saw. Oh, it was more. He saw the moments before, those fleeting, happy memories with Derek, the moments of camaraderie, of friendship, of laughter. The bond that had once been unbreakable. The same bond that had led to his death. "You saw the truth, Max?" The figure spoke at last, his voice deep and resonant, almost mournful. It echoed in Max's mind, vibrating through him like a distant rumble of thunder. The betrayal, the violence, the choice Derek made. You saw it. You lived it. And now you are here in this place because of it. Max wanted to scream, to shout at the figure for making him relive that moment. But the words caught in his throat, his body still unable to break free from the grip of the shadows that surrounded him. He couldn't make sense of it. His mind was swirling with confusion, fear, and anger. What is this place? Why am I here? Max's voice was hoarse, pleading. I was killed. I died. The figure tilted his head, as though considering the question carefully. The shadows seemed to pulse around him, responding to his every movement. You're not dead, Max. Not in the way you think. The figure's tone was gentle, almost sorrowful, as if speaking to a child who didn't yet understand. But you have crossed over. This is where the boundaries of life and death blur. This is where truths are revealed. And you, Max, are the one who must carry it forward. Max's heart pounded harder in his chest. The words didn't make sense. He had been dead. He knew he had been dead. He had felt the life drain from his body, the final moments slipping away like water through his fingers. This was a dream, he thought. This was all just a nightmare. But something in the figure's words stopped him. Something in the weight of his gaze made him feel as though he had been wrong all along. He wasn't dead. Not fully. Not yet. What is it you want me to do? Max asked, his voice trembling as he struggled to make sense of the impossible situation. What truth? What message am I supposed to carry? The figure's expression didn't change, but Max could sense a deep sadness in him. It was almost as if the figure had been waiting for him to ask that very question, and now that it had been asked, the truth would have to be revealed. The truth is simple, Max. The figure's voice was soft but filled with gravity. Derek's actions did not just change your fate, they changed the world's. He opened a door that cannot be closed. And you will carry the message of what follows? Max's mind reeled. What did that mean? Derek had been the one to strike him down, but now he was being told that his death, his murder, was part of something larger, something more significant. A message? He wasn't sure he could understand it, but the figure's presence was overwhelming, like the weight of 1,000 truths pressing down on him all at once. And then, the darkness around him began to shift again. The air grew thicker, colder, the figures from before returning, their eyes glowing in the dark, watching, waiting. Their presence was suffocating, and Max's heart began to race once more. The path has been set, Max. The figure's voice softened. It's too late to turn back. Max's pulse quickened. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to face whatever was waiting for him, but the more the figure spoke, the more he realized that there was no escaping it. The truth was coming for him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The figure's voice lingered in Max's ears, its weight pressing down on him like a stone. The words, simple yet impossibly heavy, twisted in his mind. The path has been set. It's too late to turn back. Max could feel the shadows closing in around him again, the air growing thick, suffocating. He wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but every word that rose to his lips was stifled by the oppressive silence of the void. His chest tightened, and a cold sweat broke out on his skin as the figures, the dark shapes that surrounded him, shifted in the corners of his vision. He wasn't alone. He could feel them watching him, waiting for him to move, to make a choice, but there was no choice. No escape. The world around him seemed to stretch and distort. The once solid earth beneath him now felt unstable, shifting like the landscape of a dream. Max staggered, trying to find his footing, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The darkness around him pressed tighter, and in that moment, Max felt as though he were drowning in it, pulled down into a bottomless pit. His thoughts raced, but they were fragmented, chaotic, a tangle of questions that couldn't find answers. What had Derek done? What had he opened? And why was Max still here, in this place that felt more like a prison than an afterlife? The memories of his death, of Derek's betrayal, came rushing back, overwhelming him. The feeling of fists striking, of breath choking in his throat, of the world going black. He had died, hadn't he? How could he be here now, feeling so alive and yet so empty? He had no answers, only more questions. And the deeper he sank into the abyss of his thoughts, the clearer the reality became. He was stuck. There was no going back. The figure had told him the truth, even if he couldn't fully comprehend it yet. There was something bigger at play, something that Max had been thrust into without warning, without preparation. Max's body felt heavy, his limbs like lead as he struggled to breathe. He was suffocating, drowning in the weight of the questions and the implications that hung in the air. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, wrapping around him like chains, pulling him deeper into the void. His mind screamed for clarity, for understanding, but no matter how hard he tried to grasp at the threads of his thoughts, they slipped through his fingers. The voice, that low, resonant voice, returned. It spoke with an unsettling calmness, as though it had seen this before, as though it had witnessed countless souls fall into the same trap. You are here because you are meant to be. Max's eyes snapped open, his chest heaving with the sudden rush of air. His heart hammered in his chest. What does that mean? He was desperate now, his voice shaky, frantic. What do you mean? Why not someone else? But the voice didn't respond immediately. Instead, the air around him grew colder. The darkness pressed in, and Max could feel the figures closing in again. He could hear them now, the whispers, the soft murmurs in the shadows, like an ancient chant, as though the world itself was speaking in riddles. You were chosen. You are the key to what comes next. The figure's voice was firm now, and Max felt the weight of the words pressing into his very soul. You are the one who will bear the burden of the truth. Max shook his head, his hands trembling. I don't understand. The words came out broken, full of fear and confusion. What truth? What burden? You must carry the message, Max. The truth of Derek's actions, of what they have set in motion. The end of this world. The figure's voice was solemn, carrying an undeniable finality. The prophecy is coming to fruition, and you will bear witness to what is to come. Max staggered back, his legs giving way beneath him. He collapsed to the ground, his head spinning. The words, the prophecy, felt like a weight too heavy to carry. He couldn't understand how it could be true. His mind was still reeling from the images of that night, of Derek's face, twisted with rage, his fists pounding into Max, leaving him lifeless. How could that have anything to do with the end of the world? You saw it, Max? The voice came again, softer now, almost tender. You saw the first signs. The dark forces that were unleashed the moment Derek struck you. The curse was already in motion, and you are part of it. Max's body trembled as the realization struck him. His death wasn't just a tragic accident. It wasn't some random act of violence. It was the beginning of something much larger, something far more sinister. The world was changing. The shadows that surrounded him were a manifestation of that change. He had seen the darkness in Derek's eyes, and now it was reaching beyond him, infecting everything. I'm not strong enough for this. Max's voice was barely audible, his body crumpling in on itself, as though the weight of the world had come crashing down upon him. I'm not ready. The figure remained silent, its presence overwhelming. But Max could feel it now more than ever. The figure wasn't here to comfort him. It wasn't here to guide him. It was here to force him to accept his role in this twisted, inevitable chain of events. And as the darkness seemed to close in once more, Max understood the terrifying truth. It wasn't just Derek who had opened the door to this nightmare. His death, his pain, his betrayal had all been part of something much larger, something that he couldn't escape. The world, as he knew it, was already slipping into darkness. The forces were at work, and Max was the witness, the one who would carry the truth to the world. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The worst had yet to come. Max's mind was spinning, the darkness pressing down on him, suffocating, as if the very air was becoming thick and oppressive. His thoughts were fragmented, shards of memories and fear colliding with one another. He could hear the voice again, its cold resonance filling the space around him, crawling into his mind. "You will witness the truth, Max. You must carry it forward." But Max couldn't focus on that. He couldn't focus on the prophecy, on whatever message he was supposed to carry. His body was trembling, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and his mind was still reeling from the crushing weight of the realization. The truth. Derek's betrayal. His death. The moments before, the agony, the finality, the pain, were still fresh in his mind, echoing like an open wound. His vision blurred, his pulse racing. He was supposed to have died. He had felt the life drain from his body. He was dead, yet here he was. The pain, the fear, the suffocating weight of it all, they were still with him. The shadows seemed to close in tighter now, pressing around him like a living thing, the air too thick to breathe. Max felt like he was drowning again, his chest tightening, his throat constricting as though it were impossible to take a breath. The fear gripped him once more, squeezing the air from his lungs, filling him with a sense of powerlessness. He didn't know what to do, what to say. His body was stuck, frozen in place, unable to move, unable to escape. "Max?" The voice came again, softer this time, but no less menacing. He knew it wasn't coming from a physical place. No, this voice was in his mind, in the deepest corners of his soul, where nothing else could reach. It wasn't just a voice. It was a force. A presence. "What do you want from me?" Max gasped, his voice hoarse, cracking from the strain. "Why am I still here? What do you want me to do?" The shadows parted slightly, and for the briefest moment, a sliver of light shone through. It was fleeting, but it was enough to reveal something. A figure standing at the edge of the darkness. It was the same figure from before, the one who had been speaking to him. But this time, it was closer, its presence more oppressive, more real. The figure was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It had substance now. It was tangible, its form casting a shadow on the ground, taller than Max, looming over him. Max's heart pounded as the figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The light seemed to dim again, retreating as the figure approached, leaving Max once more in the oppressive blackness. "You've already seen it, Max. The truth. What Derek did, what he unleashed." The figure spoke again, its voice low and filled with an air of inevitability. "He opened a door that cannot be closed. And now, you are the one who must stand in the way of what comes next." Max felt his stomach turn. He was dizzy, his body aching, his mind struggling to understand the magnitude of the words. A door? What was this about a door? Derek had been the one who had hurt him, who had killed him, but now, Max was being told that Derek had somehow set off something bigger, something that threatened the world itself. The betrayal, the violence, it wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about his death. "I don't understand," Max cried, his voice rising in desperation. "What is this? What's happening to me? Why me?" The figure stepped closer, and the shadows seemed to recoil as it did, like the light itself was afraid of what this being represented. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. It leaned forward, its presence suffocating. "You are the one, Max." The figure's words were filled with something ancient, something powerful. "You were chosen for this. Chosen to deliver the truth. You carry the message of what is coming. The world will change. It's already begun." Max's legs gave way beneath him, his knees hitting the cold ground. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, the air too thick to breathe. He gasped for air, his vision starting to blur as he fought to stay conscious. His mind reeled. The world changing? What was this? What did it all mean? What happens now? Max managed to choke out, his voice barely audible. What am I supposed to do? The figure remained silent for a long moment. The pressure in the air grew heavier, the shadows thicker. It was like the entire world was waiting for an answer that would never come. Max's heart pounded in his chest, every beat echoing in the silent void. Then, the figure's voice returned, soft yet filled with an unbearable weight. You will speak the truth. You will carry the message of what is to come. And the world will listen. Max's heart stilled. The words didn't make sense, but he knew they weren't just empty promises. The weight of them, the finality of the figure's words, they meant something. This wasn't just some twisted vision, some fevered nightmare. The truth, his truth, was going to change everything. As the darkness pressed closer, Max felt the ground beneath him tremble. It wasn't just the air around him that was shifting. The entire world seemed to be changing, bending, breaking. Something was coming. Something that had been unleashed the moment Derek had struck the final blow. Max tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. His body was too weak, too heavy. The shadows closed in again, the whispers growing louder, the air colder, as if the world itself were moving towards something terrible, something inevitable. It's not over yet. The figure's voice was the last thing Max heard as the darkness swallowed him whole. The world felt as though it was coming apart at the seams. Max's body remained heavy, as though bound to the earth, unable to break free from the shadows that encircled him. Every breath he took was shallow, the air too thick to draw fully into his lungs. The oppressive silence of the void wrapped around him, but something else, something deeper, more unsettling, had taken root in his chest. He was aware of it now, a presence that reached beyond the darkness itself. His vision wavered, distorting as if the world itself was bending under the weight of the truth. The figure, this strange, imposing being that had brought him here, trapped him in this limbo, hovered in the periphery of his sight, just beyond his reach, like a shadow looming over him. Max couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling apart. His mind raced, every thought colliding with the next, trying to make sense of what had happened to him, what was happening. Derek's betrayal, the pain, the death, it all led to this. But what had it all been for? What did it all mean? Suddenly, the air shifted, and a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the space, an unnatural force, a vibration that reverberated in Max's bones. The ground beneath him trembled. The shadows seemed to grow, stretching out toward him like claws reaching for his very soul. His heart pounded in his chest, the beat heavy and unrelenting, a constant reminder of his existence in this fractured world. The figure's eyes glowed brighter now, a fierce intensity that pierced through the darkness. It took a step forward, and Max instinctively pulled back, his body tensing, bracing for whatever was coming. The figure wasn't just watching him anymore. No, it was waiting for something, for him to understand. Max, the figure's voice was no longer soft or distant. It was powerful, filled with a weight that pressed against his chest. Do you understand now? Do you see the truth? Max's breath caught. His head spun as the weight of the figure's question settled into his chest. Do I understand? He had seen the visions, the chaos, the destruction that had unfolded, but he still couldn't make sense of it all. He could feel the truth clawing at him from every direction, pulling him toward the answer he didn't want to face. You were chosen because of the bond you shared with Derek? The figure continued, its voice low, like a whisper from deep within a cave. It wasn't just his actions that set this in motion. It was yours. Max's heart stuttered in his chest. His breath caught in his throat, the words sinking in like a knife. What do you mean? His voice cracked, barely audible, but the figure's words had shaken him to his core. The truth, miss. You see, Derek's betrayal wasn't just about violence. It wasn't just about the rage that drove him to kill you. It was about the choice he made to sever the bond between you two. And you? You didn't fight it. You didn't resist. You were complicit in your own death. The figure's words landed like blows, each one tearing at the fragile layers of his understanding. He had thought Derek was the one who had betrayed him. Derek, the one who had struck him down. But now the figure was telling him something else. Max had been complicit? What did that mean? Max's mind reeled. The figure's presence grew stronger, its voice deeper, more insistent. as if it were hammering the truth into his soul. The darkness you see around you is not just from Derek's actions. It is the result of both of you. It is the consequence of the bond you shared, the light you once had that now lies in ruin. Max felt his world shifting, cracking under the weight of the truth. The bond he had shared with Derek, their friendship, it had been more than just a connection between two people. It was something more powerful, something that had tied them together in ways he had never fully understood. But that bond had been broken. And now, because of it, the world was on the brink of collapse. You have to speak the truth, Max. You have to carry the message to the world. The figure's voice grew urgent, a sense of finality in the words. The destruction is not just physical. It's spiritual. It is the corruption of the soul. And it started with you, with your connection to Derek. Max's knees gave way as the weight of the figure's words threatened to crush him. His mind was spinning, his heart racing. He had been part of this. He had played a role in what had happened. He hadn't seen it before, hadn't understood the magnitude of his connection to Derek, but now, it was painfully clear. The figure loomed over him, its eyes glowing brighter with each passing moment. You were meant to see this, Max. To understand. You were meant to witness the unraveling, to feel it in your soul. You are the key, the one who will carry the warning. You will speak the truth to those who remain. And they will listen. Max's head spun, the darkness pressing in from every side, as if the world was closing in on him, suffocating him. He wanted to deny it, to run from the truth, but he couldn't. It was too real, too powerful. He couldn't ignore what had been revealed to him, even if it terrified him to the core. But what happens to me? Max gasped, struggling to find the strength to speak. What happens to me after I've delivered the truth? The figure's gaze softened, though the weight of its presence remained unchanged. You will face your own reckoning. The truth you carry will change everything. But you, Max, you will not be the same. Max's chest tightened as the figure's words sank in. His role in this prophecy, his purpose, had been set long before his death. And now he was bound to it. The world was changing, and he was at the center of it, a messenger carrying the truth of what was to come. As the figure began to fade back into the shadows, Max felt something inside him snap. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was acceptance. The truth had been given to him, and now he had no choice but to carry it forward. You will speak the truth, Max. You will witness the end. The words echoed in his mind, filling him with a sense of purpose that was both terrifying and freeing. And as the figure vanished into the void, Max understood. The end had already begun. The world felt different now. Max could feel it in the air, thick with the remnants of what had just transpired. The shadows had receded, but the pressure, the weight of what had been revealed, remained, sinking deep into his chest. He stood in the same place as before, but everything felt altered. The vast emptiness around him, the unsettling void, it wasn't just the place. It was the reflection of everything that had changed. Max's heart raced, but the fear that had gripped him before had evolved into something else. It wasn't panic anymore, it was a dawning horror. He had been given the truth, the full weight of it. He was the messenger, the one who was supposed to deliver the words that would save what remained. But at what cost? The darkness pressed in, but now, it was suffused with the knowledge that he was part of this. His death, Derek's betrayal, it wasn't just an event that had happened to him. It was a key moment, a pivotal turning point that had caused an irreversible shift in the balance of everything. Max wasn't just an innocent victim. He had been part of the cycle that was now consuming the world. He stood motionless for a long time, the weight of his purpose pressing down on him. A chilling sense of inevitability sank into his bones. There was no more room for doubt. Max could still hear the whisper of the figure's words, reverberating in his mind. You are the key. You will speak the truth. But as the finality of those words settled over him, something else began to take root. What had Derek done to him? What had he set into motion? Was the betrayal just the beginning of something worse, something larger? Max thought of Derek, of everything they had shared, the laughter, the closeness, the friendship. All of it had been built on a lie, shattered in a moment of rage. Derek had taken everything from him. He had been the catalyst for all of this, the one who had made the choice to end Max's life. Max had always thought Derek would be there, the one person he could trust. But that trust had been betrayed in the most brutal way. The brutal act itself wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a warning. It was the crack in the dam, the beginning of the end. Max had seen it all in the dark, the twisted images that had flooded his mind after the death. Derek had been the one to open the door. He had been the one to tear apart the fragile thread that had kept the world together. And now, Derek was nowhere to be found. A flicker of movement caught his attention from the corner of his eye, and Max tensed, his body stiffening. He wasn't alone. There, in the distance, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure, tall, faceless, looming in the shadows. It moved toward him slowly, deliberately, but there was no mistaking the energy it gave off. It was the same malevolent force, the same darkness that had surrounded him since his death. Max's heart hammered in his chest, and instinctively, his body wanted to run. But he knew there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Derek. The name slipped from his lips before he could stop it. The thing, in the shadows had no face, but Max felt as though it was staring directly at him. The figure took a step forward, the air around it pulsing with dark energy. The ground beneath Max's feet trembled, and a low, guttural growl escaped the figure, its presence more intense than anything Max had felt before. It was as if the very darkness was alive, feeding off his fear, amplifying the dread that had been building in him since the moment he had been killed. "You still don't understand, do you?" The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It was a distorted hiss, a warped echo of something ancient, something far more terrifying than anything Max could comprehend. Max's chest tightened as the figure's presence seemed to engulf him, the darkness pressing in from all sides. "I don't understand what?" Max managed, his voice shaky, barely a whisper. "You're too late, Max. You cannot stop it." The figure's voice, cruel and mocking, sent a shiver down Max's spine. The damage is already done. The choice has already been made. Derek opened the door, and you are the one who must walk through it? Max's breath caught in his throat. Walk through it? He wasn't just the key. He was part of the machine, the one who would usher in whatever was coming next. There was no stopping it. The figure's words were chillingly clear. This is your fate. This is your responsibility. You cannot escape it. The last of Max's hope, fragile as it had been, shattered in that moment. He wasn't here to change anything. He wasn't here to save the world. He was here because the prophecy had already been set in motion. There was no escape. And in that moment, Max understood the terrible truth. The world was lost. The door had been opened, and it couldn't be closed. Max had been given the truth, but the truth wasn't salvation. It was the beginning of the end. Max stood frozen, the weight of the figure's words crashing into him, each one like a physical blow. The air around him seemed to close in, pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. There was no hope left. The world was beyond saving, and he, like the rest of them, had become nothing more than a part of a larger plan he had no control over. You can't escape what's coming, Max. The figure's voice rumbled, filled with finality, its words seeping into every corner of Max's mind. The prophecy has been fulfilled. You are the messenger of the end. Max could feel the oppressive weight of it all, the darkness tightening around him like a noose. His legs shook beneath him, but no matter how much he wanted to run, to fight against the crushing certainty of the figure's words, his body refused to obey. The figure moved closer, the air growing colder, heavier with each step. Max could barely breathe, every inhale shallow and strained as if the very air itself were laced with the venom of inevitability. You have seen what is to come. The destruction, the death. There is no more time. The figure's tone was dark, its presence so overwhelming that it felt like the world itself was bowing before it. The door has been opened, and the darkness has been set loose. It cannot be stopped. Max's mind raced. The images of his death, of Derek's betrayal, flooded back to him in waves. He had trusted Derek. They had shared their lives, their secrets, and now that bond had been shattered in the most brutal way. His body still ached from the violence, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his soul. The betrayal had been a catalyst, and now, it was the final link in a chain that would lead to the destruction of everything. His thoughts flickered to the world outside, to the people who had no idea what was coming. Could they feel it too? Could they sense the pull of the darkness, the weight of the prophecy that was being carried out? Max didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain: it was too late. Too late to stop the inevitable. He had failed. You will not save them, Max. You can't. The figure's voice echoed, its coldness spreading through the air, sinking into Max's very bones. You are not the savior. You are the herald of what is to come. The darkness is your legacy. The world is already slipping through your fingers. Max felt a wave of nausea hit him as he stood there, unable to escape the truth. The world was lost, and he had been powerless to change anything. He had seen it. He had witnessed the suffering, the violence, the endless cycle of betrayal and darkness that had infected everything. Derek's actions had opened the door, and now the rest of the world would suffer the consequences. He couldn't stop it. He was never meant to stop it. You are the messenger. The figure's voice was insistent, its words final. It's too late for redemption. Too late for salvation. The darkness will spread. The end will come. Max's heart was heavy, his thoughts clouded. The weight of everything, the death, the betrayal, the truth, pressed against him with such force that he could barely breathe. It felt like the very essence of his being was being consumed by the reality of it all. There was no fighting it. There was no escaping it. This was the world now. This was what was meant to be. A cold, hollow emptiness washed over Max, and for a moment he closed his eyes, wishing it would end. Wishing that he could escape the truth, the pain, the fear. But the truth wouldn't let him. It was too real, too crushing. And then, in the midst of the suffocating darkness, a single thought cut through it all. A thought so pure, so sharp, that it pierced the fog of despair. Maybe the end wasn't the point. Max felt the weight of the figure's gaze pierce through him, but there was something else there now. A flicker of understanding. A fleeting moment of clarity. He couldn't stop what was coming. He couldn't undo the damage Derek had done. But maybe, just maybe, he could give others a chance. The light from the figure began to fade, leaving Max alone in the darkness once more. The whispers had stopped, the figure's presence receding into the shadows. The world felt empty now, hollow. But Max knew something. He knew he couldn't change what was coming. The darkness had been unleashed, and the end was inevitable. But the truth? The truth would be spoken. He would carry it. And maybe, just maybe, in the telling of it, there would be a small spark of light left in the world.